Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Newell with Diverse Issues in Higher Education, and this is In the Margins. Today's guest is Dr. Julianna Barnes, the Chancellor of South Orange Community College District. Prior to coming to SOCCD, you were the president of, and I'm sure I say this right, Cuyamaca College, right?
Yes.
And there, under your leadership, you guys were a leading institution in California for equity and innovation. Plus, I saw that you guys also won the John W. Rice Diversity and Equity Award. If I've heard about that, that's something that's just within the California system, right?
Yes, the California Community Colleges.
Yeah.
We were happy to win that award.
So good. So now I'm going to put a plug in for us. Diverse has a new diversity certification award that we will be granting what's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, it's escaping me here. Certifying our first cohort of institutions this December. So probably sometime in February or March, applications will be going out for the next cohort. So hopefully we can get some of the schools in your district involved in that round.
That would be great. I'll keep my eyes open for that.
Yeah. So with that, welcome, Dr. Barnes. If you want to say a few words before we get started.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me. As you mentioned, I'm actually fairly new to my new role here as Chancellor. It's been 2 months now, but prior to that, I did spend 7 years as president of Cuyamaca College, as mentioned, and then I have a long history, about a little over 30 years, which is hard to believe, in higher education. I'm just super excited to be here. I love reading the articles and such through diverse issues. And so I was just very honored and grateful to have been invited to this podcast.
All right, thank you. One of the big things that I kind of want to talk about today is centered around student success. And we were kind of talking earlier before we started recording about excellencia. So also, I did a lot of podcasts early this year and late last year with Ceci, centered around student success. So that was one of the things that, that really drew me to your work, was the work that you guys were doing in student success. And I think we really can't talk a lot about that unless we really go back and honestly, look at your story. I think you've had to do a lot and you've accomplished a lot, obviously, to get where you are. And, I think your story, is a great American story, if you will. I mean, so much of what I've read about you hits on so many touch points that, we talk about, daily, weekly, monthly, every year in Diverse. Over the 30 plus years that we've been doing this is talking about, issues of access. We talk about students of color and identity issues, and obviously student success is a big thing. I'm sure you're old enough to remember Muhammad Ali. I hear people always have called him the people's champion. And I was reading somewhere about you this week, and I forget the exact words, but they called you, I don't know, the students president or the students champion or something like that. But when I read it and I heard it, the first person I thought about was Muhammad Ali. So, so with that, I just want to talk about your journey. So let's kind of, I want to go back. I was reading somewhere that you described yourself as a Mexi-Pino. And
I do.
I had never heard that term. I didn't know what it meant, but I had an idea. I mean, obviously, the root words that I saw there, but I Googled it, I know if you were being like Tiger Woods, he kind of made up this name about himself, being, I think he called it Cabinet Agent. But I got it, from the standpoint, of dealing with identity issues, especially when you're a biracial person. But anyway, for anybody who wants to Google it, go to the Urban Dictionary definition of Mexi-Pino. It's actually kind of comical.
Wow, so it actually made it into the Urban Dictionary, huh?
Yeah.
There's actually a book called Becoming Mexi-Pino, so I actually have it. And so obviously that means I am bi-ethnic, biracial, Mexican, Filipino background. And so to me, it's a beautiful thing, right? It was kind of the best of both worlds in growing up, right? But it also really has defined me as a leader and really kind of probably really instilled in me kind of what some of my values are as an administrative leader in the community colleges. Yeah.
So can you sort of describe, if you will, how being, a biracial person in America, how would you say that shapes you as a child? How did that affect you?
Yeah. Well, as a child, I knew nothing different, right? That's just, that's how I grew up. Just, culturally in my family. I did grow up close to the Mexican-American border, so kind of culturally probably was kind of raised more with my Mexican roots. But in terms of just how it shaped me, I think it was just a beautiful thing, just kind of really growing up, really kind of embracing and really understanding the contributions that my people, my ancestors, contributed to this nation. I think is a really beautiful thing. It's something that's not always talked about, or at least when I was growing up, right? It wasn't always kind of talked about in school, our contributions, but it certainly was talked about in my own family. And I think, a lot of times I think many of us kind of grow up, hearing about these beautiful stories in our family, but not necessarily getting the external validation that we rightfully, need and deserve to have, as we're going through school. And, for me, that's a very significant thing for me, because I do believe that, the diverse students that we serve in higher education, in my case, in the community colleges, they need and deserve, to have themselves reflected in their higher education spaces, right? And so that, knowing that I didn't have that, you were talking about, do I remember Muhammad Ali? I was going to ask you, do you remember the book Janet and Mark? Back in the day, that I learned one of my first books was called Janet and Mark, and the dog's name was Spot, and so.
Oh yeah.
You remember that?
Yes,
Look,
yes.
Janet, look at Spot run. So my point is that, that's, Janet and Mark and the Janet and Mark type books. Those are the kinds of things that I learned about. I didn't see myself in the literature in the classroom. And I think, again, I think that has again really shaped me and the way that I lead and the decisions that I make, because again, our students need and deserve to have that validation, both in and out of the classroom in higher education, and that's not always been the case.
Were your parents immigrants?
My mom was, and on my, so at some point my grandparents were the primary folks that immigrated over, right? Okay. And then we hear stories about, what happened, in the transition here, and with, my great grandparents even. So I have stories about, the trials and tribulations that they experienced in their transition.
Mm-hmm. And, and then growing up, how much did your parents and or grandparents or other family members push you and or your siblings towards education? And I asked that because I was at the Haku, not Haku. Yeah, it was Haku. They had an event in DC about 2 or 3 weeks ago that I was at. And gosh, and I apologize, and I'm drawing a blank on their names, but they had 2 congressmen from LA area, Latinx background, and also the senator from California. And they all were there at different times. Their times didn't even overlap because, the congressmen, they're on a tight schedule. Yeah. But it was interesting that they all told the same story, independent of one another, that they all were first generation American, born here, and that their parents came here with nothing, and that they all pushed them towards an education. And, look at them now, if you will. Yeah. But
and I would say mine's the opposite. I am the first person in my family to attend college. So, I'm the first generation, I'm actually surrounded by many people who are first generation, many educators, many administrators and faculty and staff who are first generation. But so I was the first one to attend college. It was not necessarily pushed on me. There was a lot going on in my community, and honestly, I kind of found my place in education. I kind of found my peace in education, And anyway, I say that I accidentally fell upon college when I attended. Back in the day, they didn't have the internet, right? So we had
Right.
to, fill out paper applications. And I was in my AP class and people were filling out applications. And I was like, what is that? And they were like, it's time to apply for college. And I was like, oh, so I filled out one application and, I was very fortunate, to get into college, now getting into college is one thing, but then persisting through college is another. So the experience, going through college was challenging as a first generation student, but probably unlike, the senators and some of the legislative folks that you met in DC, for me, it wasn't pushed because my family just didn't know to even push, right? They thought either I need to get a job or I need to get married and have babies. In fact, even when I was in college, and I was get my bachelor's and getting my master's, my family would go, are you going to have babies? They're like, what's going on? I'm like, wait, isn't a college, I'm getting my master's degree. Is that not enough? And so
Right.
education wasn't part of the fabric of my family, right? And so I feel very grateful, of course, and fortunate that I fell upon education. And eventually, they supported me in it, kind of a moral support, because we didn't have a lot of money, so there wasn't the financial support. But, so for me, it was just by accident that I fell upon, college. I'm very grateful for it. And again, that does really shape, who I am today, and shapes who I am as a leader, being a first gen.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I think, being at a college, at a community college rather, I don't know what the ratios are, but, I'm just making the assumption you see more first gen students at community colleges than you would at a four-year institution. So
Right. Yeah.
how does your personal experience, how does that come into play with, the decisions you make in running an institution?
Yeah. Well, the beauty, I know many community colleges are very diverse, but I tell you, the California community colleges are just known for their diversity in many ways, shapes, and forms. And so we do have, including my own district, so we do have a large population of first generation learners. We also have just a very racially ethnic group of students as well, and just various social cultural experiences that they bring to the table. But for me, being first generation student of color and kind of knowing kind of what my trials and tribulations were as a student, it really does allow me to really empathize with our students and really make the decisions. And I'm very fortunate to be a chancellor and previously as a president. And even though a lot of folks say, God, don't you just feel so removed from the students? And the answer is yes. I'm fortunate enough to be housed on a college campus, so I get to walk by students and interface with students and talk to students. But what I know to be true is I'm able to make decisions at the system level, right, at the policy level, that I know will impact positively, our students. And so I'm just very mindful of the experiences that our first gen and just diverse students have in general. And I'm able to, and again, firsthand, because I was in that situation as a first gen student. And so I make, decisions accordingly. It's just really kind of, I say oftentimes, like, my beacon is DEIA, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really the beacon. And it's really what kind of really drives me and the decisions that I make. And I think it's just really just ingrained in me. I didn't necessarily learn it. And of course I learned more about it from a more maybe say qualitative perspective, but I have firsthand experience in being a first gen student of color. And so again, that's just really shaped me, just who I am as a human being, and then certainly as a professional as well.
So I would definitely say, I'm assuming then that you think that that gives you a leg up, that kind of separates you from some other presidents, who don't have that lens to look through. And, as a leader looking through that lens from where you have come from, do you find often, or have you ever found at all, that you've had, I don't want to say challenges, or maybe you've been confronted, or you've had to push harder with some other people that may be on your staff, because they didn't experience life like you did, and they're not understanding where some of these students are coming from. Have you had that, and then how did you have to deal with it?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I've really been fortunate to work with really kind of really student-centered, equity-minded, practitioners and leaders in my career. But I will say that I think the interesting difference in perspective is, let me go to my last college, where in the president's conference room we have the wall of presidents, right? And there's renderings and kind of pictures, like these sketches of all the presidents. And I was the first president in the 40-year history of that institution to be of color, right?
Wow. Okay.
And so, I think I can't tell you how many times that I would say, oh, I'm the president, and everybody's like the college president of like the whole college, like, people are just shocked, because people have a perception of who you are when you're a leader, right? Because of who, where we are. And so I think I've always, again, been grateful to and blessed to have been among like-minded individuals. But at the same time, it's been different. It was different for, it's different not just for my former institution, but I think sometimes it's different for institutions to have leaders who are first-gen leaders of color, because that's not always been the case, right?
Yeah.
And so I think from that vantage point, I've kind of experienced some kind of different perspectives or approaches where I've had to kind of bring people along with that, and people would think that I'm going to make decisions a particular way, or maybe fear that I would make decisions a particular way because I am, a first-gen, professional. I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I remember going through the hiring process, and where folks thought I was going to automatically hire a particular way because I was of color,
Right.
I don't know that they thought that way before I came along, and so anyway, so I think it's different sometimes for institutions to see leaders of color when institutions have not had that before.
We're going down one of these rabbit holes, I guess. At least I am. You touched on something there. As a leader, people think or assume you're going to hire or do things just because you're that background. But we see time in and all the time that the majority culture in this country, they do that all the time. And nobody says anything about it, if you will. It's just a norm. So, as a leader, how do you feel that pressure? I know, at least I would assume, hey, I want to help out my fellow Filipino Americans. I want to help out my fellow Mexican Americans. If everything is equal, I'd rather give the nod to that person. So I don't know, how do you juggle that, or do you juggle it? How do you look at that?
Well, I think again, going back to the role of the CEO, I think that's one of the joys and benefits and opportunities that we have as CEOs, is that we have the ability to work with practitioners and leaders to assess the system and the practices that we're employing that yield the outcomes that we're getting. And so what I'm very grateful for in California is that there is value and kind of movement afoot, including in my own district, to look at ways that we could diversify, particular ranks. For example, the faculty ranks, where we see it all the time in our data, that we have very diverse student populations, but the faculty ranks do not necessarily match that, right?
Right.
And so for me, it's about then revisiting the system and the practices and the policies that we have, and again, doing that in collaboration with the key constituents, including faculty and administrators and staff, to revisit what that looks like. I did this in my former institution, and that we're discussing that now in my current institution, because our system is perpetuating, the outcomes that we're seeing. And if we're saying that it's beneficial for students to see more diversity in the ranks, and there is a value here to have that in place, then that's incumbent upon me and us in my district to again revisit those policies and practices that have yielded the outcomes that we're seeing, right? So I know that I'm very grateful. Again, there's a movement afoot to look at that, and part of that is making sure that that we are providing opportunities at the front end for individuals to make it to the table, right? To apply. And sometimes sometimes the practices that we employ during the selection process, the criteria sometimes that we're delineating, sometimes the language that we're using in recruitment materials, sometimes the places where we're recruiting, all of those things matter, right? And so we're going to be digging into that in my current district, and we certainly did that in my former district, where we were very intentional about developing an inquiry group to assess the current structures and practices and policies, and then do something about it to bring about more diversity in our hiring process. So it's about system policy change. It really is.
All right, well, that's a good segue. We're talking about, system policy changes. So I was listening to your message that I saw it on YouTube that they posted your message to the SOCCD community when you started, and you were talking about your first 100 days of listening. I like that, so I'm gonna give you a high five for that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thought it was very profound,
Yeah.
But so I know you're only like 2 months in, but I guess in your first 60 days of listening, so far, what do you see potentially as your biggest challenge? And conversely, what has been like the most pleasant surprise? Like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. This is going to be.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So this is giving a peekaboo look at what I'm seeing in terms of themes. While I knew that this district was really, really valued DEIA, I really have heard this thus far in my 100 days of listening, that it truly is a value, but there is a distinct desire for us to really go from talk to walk, right? And we are already walking. There's a lot of beautiful work already happening in the district here from a practice policy perspective, but there's a desire to really take it to another level and really be sure that DEIA is really kind of infused like vertically and horizontally across everything that we're doing. So I see that as a it's a challenge, but it really is an opportunity and a welcomed one. So that's definitely an initial theme that I'm seeing that I will eventually share with the college and district community. And then another thing, clearly, I mean, you and I right now are Zooming, so clearly there is a theme that I'm seeing with regard to it's a challenge and an opportunity, and that is kind of re-envisioning, reimagining kind of the future of community colleges in this whole COVID era, right? I don't even know if I want to say post-pandemic anymore. I don't even know if we're going to arrive really to a post-pandemic state, but we're living with COVID. So given that, what are the implications for instruction, support services, human resources with regard to remote work, facilities, what's the future facilities technology? And so our whole ecosystem is really changing given COVID. And so, it's a challenge for sure. But there is really an opportunity to kind of re-envision and reimagine, who we are, who we need to be for our students, so that they are able to achieve their goals and thrive and meet their goals in the future. Because I think many community colleges saw a decline in enrollment, and to me that's an equitable access issue. And so, again, we're starting to learn to live with COVID. I think we have a lot of work to do. So I'm hearing that too in my 100 days of listening is kind of implications for practice, policy, leadership, all of that, related to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic, I've definitely heard about, not just in community colleges, but four-year institutions, graduate programs. There's been a drop in enrollment. Been some spikes here and there. Some people are getting it back. So, where exactly is your institution sitting in regards to enrollment? Pre and post, quote unquote COVID. And how would you say it has impacted students of color? Whether you think it's positive or negative, it's just where do you see that impact?
The California system in general experienced a drop. I believe the last I read, it was last year, it was something like 18%. We saw a decline in the California community colleges, and while this is not good, still in my own district, it was something around 11%. So it was still in the double digits, still not good. As I shared, for me, enrollment is all about equitable access and equitable success. And so, so clearly we were losing, our students. And then, when we disaggregate, we're seeing particular populations that we're losing at higher rates. And I'm very grateful. And we still haven't fully recovered. I just actually met with one of my team members here today, and she was sharing some of the enrollment data, and it looks like we're bumping up about 2% down compared to last year, which is, it's not 11%, it's not 18%, and I would love if it was in the positive, right? And we're still working on that. We're still at the beginning of this, it's not totally the beginning of the semester, but it's still new. We still have some short-term classes where students are enrolling in. And so still have some work to do. It's a big hot topic in California, and including in my own district. And we are looking at different strategies that we are going to employ to ensure that we're opening the door to students, to really ensure that we are providing that equitable access. And that's our mission. That's what we're all about, is open access, right? But the other thing I would say is enrollment, a lot of times folks look at enrollment as like the front door, but we also know that enrollment is also about retention and persistence, right? It's keeping the students that are already enrolled with us. And so I know I'm very grateful that the South Orange County Community College District, where I'm serve as chancellor, that both colleges are really employed in exercising a lot of innovation to really try to increase persistence and retention. So we are both colleges are engaged in the guided pathways work, for example. Both colleges are engaged in developmental education reform, and so there's a lot of work that the colleges are employing right now to ensure that we do see that increased persistence, and that we are closing those equity gaps, and that then ultimately leads to higher rates of enrollment as well.
Exactly. So the decline in enrollment, just staying there just for a second, where are these students going? Where did they go? Do you guys know?
Well, there's literature and research out there, about this, and again, we're trying to unpack it in my own district, but what we do know, and I know this to be true in my own region, is that we are seeing a decline in our high school graduates, right? So there's fewer high school graduates, so that traditional age population, we're seeing decline in that arena. So that is something that I think many districts are also seeing, and I frankly, I do feel like students are changed with COVID. Maybe priorities have changed as well, so yeah, where have they gone exactly? I think that's a really great question.
I mean, and I ask it because everywhere I go, especially when you look at I'll just call them blue collar jobs, really in the
Yeah.
service industry, the supply chain. I mean, everybody is still saying we don't have workers or not enough workers.
Yeah.
Everybody, we don't have people. And so initially my thought was, okay, well, everybody went back to school. You know what I mean? They're going to increase their skill set so they can get better jobs. But the schools are saying nobody's here. So it's almost like we've had a whole, and I don't want to say a generation of people because it's definitely cross-sectional. It's not like it's just a certain age group, at least I don't think it is. But a whole segment of our population has checked out, it seems like, from the workforce and from education. So I'm like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I just went to a conference the other day, and they were actually, I have this report here. It's the community indicators report for Orange County, for my own county. And actually, unemployment is way down. Obviously, there was a really spike in unemployment during the pandemic, but unemployment's way down. So I think folks are going back to work, and we also are again seeing kind of more students coming back to college, because we're seeing that in our enrollment numbers. So I think people are going back to work, and I think people are going back to college, but perhaps not at the rates, the quick rates that we had hoped. And so, I think it's our job as practitioners and leaders of the community colleges to design our colleges to make it so enticing that students want to return, right? And I think that's what we're doing. But they're kind of maybe slowly trickling in versus, running and beating the door down to come in. It's kind of maybe more of a slow trickle.
Right.
And that perhaps matches kind of the slow kind of return to no, I wouldn't say return to normal, because I don't know what that is anymore. But I think kind of the post-COVID return, I think we're seeing enrollments kind of ease in the same way that COVID is slowly starting to kind of it's still there, but it's kind of slowly becoming more manageable, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely dissipating. I was just telling someone the other day, I said, I guess, down the road, COVID is probably just going to be like the flu. You know what I mean? Like every year we get flu shots, people now are going to be getting COVID shots. And but I think at the end of the day, we're going to have a new normal, right? So to your point, I think, the pandemic is not over, but it definitely has changed things. But what do you post, and I put that in air quotes, post-COVID, what has been the, I hate to always talk about gloom and doom, but what do you think has been like, what has been good? What's the lemonade and out of these lemons that you guys in administration and community colleges and in higher ed, that's going to be good for students moving forward that's come out of COVID?
That's a really great question. I think one of the things that happened during COVID is it really put a spotlight on what students need, right? I mean, we've always had lots of needs. Our students have always had needs, when I'm saying that, when I'm talking about that, there's the financial piece of it, but there's also the basic needs in terms of housing and food and transportation. And COVID really elevated or put a spotlight on those needs. And so what I think is really great is that I think community colleges, and certainly the ones here in California, and certainly my own district, we have really upped our game with really supporting students more robustly with their needs, their non-academic needs, right? Because sometimes students depart from college because there are other non-academic factors that perhaps where they're not perhaps getting the supports that they truly need out of their higher education institution. So we really upped our game with supporting students' basic needs. I know my own district right now, we are working on an application, and we're actually doing a second survey with our students, really trying to unpack need as it relates to affordable housing. So I know we are going to be submitting a pretty significant application soon to the state to ask for funds to build affordable housing for students. Because again, I think the pandemic really illuminated the fact that, oh gosh, our students are suffering. They've always been suffering, but for some reason we really fine-tuned our understanding with regard to kind of non-academic needs that our students have, our diverse students have, and now we're actually proactively doing something about it, or not like we weren't before, but we're really taking it to the next level. We have, basic needs centers, we have food pantries. We really are addressing the needs of students so that they can focus on their academics, so that they can persist, and so that they can complete and enter into the workforce, right? Because many times non-academic factors have contributed to their departure. And so I think while that's not always a good thing, clearly it's not a good thing that students have so many needs. It is a good thing that we are acknowledging it, and we are being intentional and proactive with supporting those non-academic needs.
I'm laughing, two things here. My daughter, she's at a 4-year school in Virginia at William and Mary, and she's just literally emailing me this week that they're not going to have housing for seniors next year on campus.
Oh, wow.
She's got to get an apartment, and when you said affordable housing for students, I was like, oh, I need that. Because the prices she is quoting me on what it's going to cost, just like, oh my goodness. So I kind of cringe at it, but you caught my ear with that. When you say affordable housing for students, what is that looking like? Are you talking about basically dorms, or are you talking about housing for families? Because a lot of these students are, part of families, if you will.
Yeah. And so that's, as I mentioned, that we're doing a survey right now to assess what the need is. And we are asking students, would you need a single bed? Do you have a family? Do you have a spouse or a significant other? And so we are asking our students kind of what the needs are.
Right.
And then, we will be submitting our application accordingly.
Gotcha. Understood.
Yeah. But again, it's a competitive process, so it'll take a while for us to get there. But we are proactively working on it.
That if it comes to fruition, that is definitely an example of excellency for you guys.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But so I'm listening to you in regards to some of the positive that came out of COVID. But there was a lot of Asian hate during COVID. How did you guys have to deal with that at your former institution? Are you dealing with it here, there, now, where you are now? What are your thoughts on that, especially as a person with an Asian American background?
Yeah. At my former institution, I was very grateful because the board, and I believe my board here, even though I wasn't here at the time, what I really appreciate is our trustees really came out strong, and they're very vocal about standing up against Asian hate, right? And so that also was true. I think both of my institutions, my former district, my current district, the boards of trustees, at that highest level, these elected officials, passed resolutions in support of our Asian American population. And so I think that goes a long way with really, again, that our top level, public officials really, drawing the line in the sand. Hey, like we will not tolerate this in any way, shape, and form. And so that is something, that we engaged in at both districts. I'm very fortunate we didn't see. I don't believe we saw this here in my current district either, but my former district, we didn't see any really horrible acts or anything like that. But again, I think we were very vocal and clear that hate of in any form will not be tolerated, including Asian hate.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to again, like I said, we I was mentioning to you earlier, we did a podcast series with Ceci and just looking at student success. And a lot of what you talked about in regards to things that were positive that came out of COVID, what you're doing for students was, that what you were sharing, I heard that same sentiment from just so many people as well. And so, I want to go back to, your time at, gosh, I have a hard time with this word.
Miyamaka. Yeah.
When you guys were an example of Excellencia finalists in 2019, for those who in the audience who aren't familiar with Excellencia, they're a group out of here in DC. And the examples of Excellencia is a nationally recognized program for institutions doing innovative work in advancing opportunities for Latinx students. And so what you guys were awarded for or recognized for at your former school was you guys were the first to scale, you scaled your developmental reform efforts. I'm trying to read this right here. And you eliminated quite a few of your remedial courses, and you adopted changes to your course, was the course placement policies, and you provided support to students who need it when they were placed into a transfer level course. So tell us about the success of that program, and is that something that is already maybe in existence at SOCCD, or do you plan to bring it there if it's not there?
Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that. So, I have to say that in California, in the system, there is legislation that passes. It's called AB 705, and there's a new piece of legislation that was just recently passed as well, AB 1705, which was an accompanying piece of legislation, and it was all focused on developmental education reform. But I would say that my former institution, even before the legislation, there was a movement afoot to really reform developmental education, and which I'm very, very grateful for. In fact, before I even became the college president there, I received, and this is a dream because this doesn't always happen, but I had math faculty write me a memo, and they gave me a bunch of math data. They had a proposal to eliminate remediation and open up the door to college level to all students, and develop and scale a co-requisite model way. And they say, well, we want to meet with you in your first week of your presidency. And so I did. I met with the math faculty and the dean and the VP at the time, and they said, we really want to go to scale with developmental education reform in math. And fortunately, I had done some research in my doctoral days around developmental education, and I had this document that they gave me, and it's an historic document. It's an artifact because the document I had stars and hearts and amens all over it, and I said, and all I said was, let's do it, and that's all they needed, and it was a beautiful journey. It was a very faculty driven process supported by administration, and really that college really became kind of really a beacon and example in the state and nation with regard to its developmental education reform movement in both math and English. And ESL really started to do some innovation as well in that arena. And what was really beautiful is that just the data, and I wish I had it handy right now, but there were some just fabulous pieces of data that showed really huge increases in students of color, particularly Latinx and African American students, having access to college level math and English when before we would basically close the door, right? Because they'd have so many layers of remediation and they would never get out of it. I call it like Hotel California, right? You could get in, but you can never leave, right?
Right.
And so we just saw some really fabulous outcomes with regard to accessing college level, and through the co-requisite model, we saw some fabulous outcomes with regard to successful completion of college level. And then that college had done so much work that they started to do these follow-up studies and noted that students who went through these co-requisite courses also did well in classes after that, like in some of the science classes, right? And so, and then we also saw, again, beautiful increases in access and success in English with the developmental education reform and the efforts in English as well. And so really, because such a large proportion of students of color are directed to, and I would say misdirected based on faulty assessment tools, because so many students of color have been misdirected to developmental education forever, for decades. I mean, how about you and I take the assessment test right now and see if we get placed into remediation, right?
No, it's true. It's my mother, not to get personal, but my mother was a teacher in the school system, and she had a friend who worked at the elementary school that I was at, and she was like, I need to tell you something. They're trying to put your son in remedial courses.
Yeah.
And and if not for my mother being in the system, that's where they immediately were tracking me that way in kindergarten. And I hadn't even done anything. And I graduated from high school with like a 3.9 GPA. I mean, I'm saying, I mean, not in a braggadocious way, but I'm just saying, like, how did they even determine that? It happens. So
it does. And so, for decades and decades, forever, we've been misplacing particularly students of color in remedial courses, and they've never been able to get out. And it's been no fault of their own. It's been based on, from my point of view, kind of faulty practices and we've been able to kind of remove those barriers and really believe in the capacity that our students have to learn and succeed, right? So there's been a lot of growth with regard to our own mindsets and believing in the student capacity to succeed, and then designing even our curriculum and the way we support students in the classroom through this co-requisite model. And then we're seeing, we let them in and they succeed, and it's been a beautiful thing. And it's not that instantaneous. There's been a lot of learning that we've had to, there's been, trials and tribulations with the work up and down the state here in California, but by and large, we've seen some really wonderful outcomes. And I really do think it's one of the ultimate kind of equity imperatives that we've engaged in as a state, and certainly my former district and also my current district, we've really engaged in this beautiful work, and still, have a ways to go. And I think when I say we have a ways to go, I think this is both it's an effort focused on both practitioners and practices, right? Because I think we still have non-believers, even though there's so much literature and data that shows that this is an effective route to go in. We still have a lot of work to do with regard to helping individuals come along with this work. And again, certainly some work we have to do with changing kind of practice.
Yeah, I mean, I just pulled up while you were talking. I just Googled it right quick and got to Excelencia's page.
Yeah.
Just looking at what you guys' numbers are, I mean, you're right. They're just dramatic increases. Just to give our listeners some ideas here. The increased Latinx student access to transfer level programs in math and English. It said in math, you guys went from 24% to 100%.
Yeah, I know.
And for Latinx students, it was 21% to 100%.
Yeah.
And in English, it was 12 to 100%. And for first-time students, 7 to 100. I mean, that's just in math and English. And there were some other programs that you guys had in here. But, those numbers are so staggering to me that it just almost makes me feel like the system was flawed in the beginning. I mean, this is significant. This was, I think, one of the major kind of system failures, and it's not, and this is from well-intended good people. I mean, we designed it, and the good part is, I had math faculty who kind of, they had to kind of mourn the loss of the developmental education remedial curriculum that they themselves designed. They had to kind of mourn the loss of that, but they were grateful to mourn the loss. And so again, it's a really wonderful work that
many colleges and districts are engaged in. And again, there's legislation now that's mandating it here in California. And sometimes the legislation is not that popular. But the legislation does allow colleges to look at data. And if they have data that show that students are succeeding in remedial classes, they can continue, to do it. But they'd be hard pressed to find data that show that students are doing well in remediation. So,
well, yeah, I owe Sarita Brown, who's the CEO of Excellencia, a call on another matter. So I'm gonna have to go back and tell her she's gonna have to. They're gonna have to redo the votes for 2019.
I know we were just honored to have been recognized. But there was a lot of really great examples there. But honestly, what we say and what I say, the biggest prize for us is seeing the students succeed. Because just think about it. What are we focused on right now? And rightfully so in higher education, student completion, right? We don't always see students enter. Sometimes they don't complete. Well, we were so focused on completion on the back end. Right. We really had to focus on that front end, because that's where we were losing so many students in developmental education purgatory, And so, so for me, the biggest prize or award is actually seeing the increased student access and success and the closing of equity gaps. So the award would have been wonderful, but the recognition was still wonderful.
Yeah, no, it's you. I mean, every year when I go and I read them and look at it, it's just like, I don't even know how they chose the one they chose, because they're all just phenomenal. So I do congratulate you, for what you guys accomplished there, and hopefully it continues at South Orange. We're kind of getting here to the end of time, but I wanted to ask you, a couple of questions here to close out. As a president, as a mother, chancellor now, and then knowing your background, what advice would you give to parents now that have first generation students that are in K-12, or students that are finishing up high school and now going into community college or 4-year schools? Like, what advice would you give them on how to succeed? Because I think about just all the stuff I didn't know when I got to college. If I had known, when I started.
Yeah. I think our systems are definitely better designed to support students. Just like you said, I didn't know. I didn't know there was advisors. I didn't know about a bunch of things too. I'm like you, right? And so I would say my advisement, I would say a couple things. One, believe that you can, right? I think sometimes the system doesn't facilitate belief in self, right? And we start to embrace it and maybe not believe that we can do it. So one, I would say, believe that you can succeed, because you can. And then two, I would say that that our system is here, that our colleges are here, that our faculty are here, that our staff are here, and that we are 100% behind you succeeding. Right. And we will do everything possible to do that. That we have programs and systems in place to ensure that you will succeed. So believe that you can, and then trust that we have the staff and the faculty that will ensure your success. And I really believe that. We really have designed some really, the systems today are different than they were before. We're always in a continuous improvement loop, right? We always have more that we could do to improve and support students, particularly now that we're living with COVID, right? Right. But I would say, believe that you can, and know that we are here to support you, and that you can succeed.
Okay, no, thank you. And my last question is kind of personal, for my personal benefit. So, I'm just looking at you pretty much have been in San Diego, like almost, or San Diego County, like your entire life. Yep. It appears.
And now I'm in Orange County, which is an hour north of San Diego.
Right, but even that you're in Southern Orange County, so you still didn't get far. But yeah, I mean, actually, I wasn't asking you this, but so are you still living where you used to live, or did you have to actually move up to Orange County?
I moved up here. I do have a home down in San Diego, but I rented a place up here in Orange County so that I'm really close to where I'm, like 15 minutes away, if that.
Okay.
And so I'm very grateful to be in the community. And and again, like you said, I'm still SoCal. I'm a Southern California person through and through. But it's a new community. So I am proactively trying to learn about our community. In fact, this Saturday, I'm going to be going on a community walk with the Orange County United Way. They organize these monthly walks to learn about the different communities in South Orange County. So I am very much, integrating into the new county. But yeah, I am definitely a Southern California person, as you noted, born and raised in SoCal.
Exactly. And I can't be mad at you. I've been here in the DC area, different parts, but I haven't left. I leave and I come right back.
It's an interesting question, because before this, I serve as a mentor for several people, including through, I don't know if you've heard of the NCCHC, the National Council of it's a national organization that supports Latinos, Latinx individuals. So I serve as a mentor for a woman, and she's at a crossroads in her career. She's from Texas. And she asked me, she said, I'm feeling pressure to maybe move and take a job somewhere else, but I never thought about moving. And the reality is, not all professionals, have a desire or a need to pick up and move to a whole nother state, or some professionals, prefer to stay in their home communities. And I just told her, I go, hey, it's really, it's an individual choice where, it's based on your own personal, professional, needs and wants. And so for me, it has worked out for me to be a SoCal person. And I'll say it, I don't see myself moving out of SoCal, to be honest with you.
Well, you have been blessed, because a lot of people that I know over the years, and I think we're probably about the same age, because I've been doing this for 30 plus years as well. As I'm going to say, you got to move up. So, you have been, definitely blessed to have moved up and reached chancellor level. You haven't even left home, if you will.
Yeah.
Whereas some people, they're in California, then they're in Texas, then they're in Wyoming, and then they're in New York. They had to get to those positions. So since you've been there so long, I need to tap into your resources, because we've got a team of folks that are going to be out in San Diego actually this weekend.
For Haku?
For Haku, yeah. And me personally, I'm going to be out there a week later, maybe the 21st, I think 22nd, something like that, for the Coupa conference, which is out in San Diego this year. So I need to know like 3 things from you. I need restaurants here. Okay, so in Googling this what is it? Now I forgot the word already. Was it Mexi-Pino? I saw that there was like some Mexi-Pino restaurants, in the area. So I don't know if you have a recommendation there, but I want to know who has the best fish tacos, and then what's like your favorite restaurant.
Okay, so I'm putting it in the chat. So this one, a lot of times people go to the tourist spots.
Exactly. That's what I don't want. That's what I'm asking.
This is the community Mexican restaurant. I kind of call it like the In-N-Out burger. It's like the Mexican restaurant, like In-N-Out burger. There's just a small menu, but it's really great. And it's called Las Cuatro Milpas. It's been around for over 50 years. It's family owned, and it's in Barrio Logan near Chicano Park. So it is in the community, and you get it. And there's always a line, and there's community members there. There's business members with ties. It's because it's such a great place, and it's authentic Mexican food. And right in the back, when you sit down, you'll see them making the homemade tortillas in the back. Yeah, and it's just very authentic Mexican food, and it's right in the middle of Barrio Logan, and it's family owned. If you go to San Diego and you don't go to Las Cuatro Lipas, then you're missing out. So I'm giving you that.
All right, I'm gonna put it on my list. But hey, Dr. Barnes, thank you, so much for your time. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And I'm gonna have to look at the schedule. I don't know what your schedule is like, but when we are on the road, we do like to visit. So, like I said, I'm gonna be out there, and then I'm leaving there, and we're going up to another meeting that's up in Tahoe. So I'm actually going to drive up. So obviously, I'll be going through South Orange. So
Okay, great.
if we have time for a campus visit, that would be good. But
Yeah, just look me up, and we'll be happy to accommodate.
yeah. Okay. Again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. You made it like a conversation. This was awesome.
Yeah. Right. So thank you.